My name is Ilara Finch. I'm 32 years old, unmarried, no children, and for the last 9 years I've worked as a project coordinator for a mid-sized logistics firm. It's not a job people find impressive when they hear it at dinner parties, but it's steady, demanding, and unforgiving in the way responsibility always is. I manage deadlines, budgets, people who don't like being managed, and problems that arrive unannounced and expect solutions immediately. I'm good at it. I've always been good at holding things together. That skill didn't start at work. It started at home. Growing up, my family used the same words for me over and over again. Mature for your age. Reliable. Easy. They said it like praise. I accepted it like a badge of honor. I didn't cry much. I didn't ask for much. I learned early that the fastest way to earn approval was to make myself useful and invisible at the same time. My father liked that about me. He is not a loud man. Never was. He doesn't shout to dominate a room. He controls with silence, with pauses that stretch just long enough to make you feel small. When he speaks, people listen, not because he's kind, but because disagreement always comes with consequences. I spent most of my life trying not to trigger them. My younger sister, Marin, is the opposite of me in every way that seems to matter in our family. She's emotional, expressive, fragile in the way that invites protection. Where I adapted, she resisted. Where I solved problems, she created storms. Somehow, she always emerged from them wrapped in sympathy, while I stood off to the side, already expected to clean up whatever mess remained. My mother used to say, "You're strong, Ilara. Marin needs us more." That sentence followed me into adulthood. I paid my own way through college with scholarships and part-time jobs. Marin changed majors 3 times. I moved out at 22. Marin moved back in at 26, just for a while. I stopped mentioning when things were hard. Marin announced every inconvenience like a crisis. When my father praised me, it was never for who I was, only for what I handled without complaint. I didn't question it. I thought that was just how families worked. The turning point came with the house. My parents decided, almost impulsively, to move out of the city and buy a property in a small town 3 hours north. My father called it a smart investment. My mother called it our fresh start. When they showed me photos, I saw something else entirely. An aging structure with outdated wiring, uneven floors, water damage in the basement, and a roof that looked one hard winter away from collapse. They were excited, overwhelmed, unprepared, and they called me. Not directly, of course. My father never asks for help outright. He frames it as inclusion, as trust. "You're good at this kind of thing," he said over the phone. "We could really use your eye, just to get us organized." I hesitated. I had a full workload. I just started saving seriously for my own place. But something familiar tugged at me. That old reflex. The need to prove I was still dependable, still worthy of being considered part of the family. So I agreed. The plan, as it was presented to me, was simple. I would come up for 2 weeks, help coordinate repairs, get contractors lined up, manage permits, create a realistic budget. Marin would be there too, my mother added casually. She needed a change of scenery, apparently. She'd bring her 5-year-old daughter, Ivy. That should have given me pause. When I arrived, the house looked worse in person. Dust clung to everything. Half-unpacked boxes filled the living room. There was no clear plan, no timeline, no sense of priorities. Within an hour, I had a list going in my notebook, issues ranked by urgency, phone numbers scribbled in the margins. Marin arrived the next morning with a suitcase, a coffee in hand, and a familiar look on her face, the one that said she was already overwhelmed. The pattern re-established itself quickly. I took calls. I scheduled inspections. I spent hours reviewing estimates and explaining calmly why certain things couldn't be postponed. Marin slept in, complained about the town, let Ivy run through the house unsupervised while I tried to keep her away from exposed wiring. Any suggestion I made about structure, nap times, safety, basic boundaries, was met with a sigh or a sharp look. If I pushed even slightly, Marin's voice would wobble, and she'd disappear into our parents' bedroom. She always came back with red eyes. By the fourth day, my name was being spoken with careful tension, as if I were a problem that needed managing. I felt it then, though I didn't want to admit it. That familiar shift. The way usefulness turns into expectation. The way expectation turns into entitlement. Still, I stayed quiet. I worked harder. I told myself it would pass. I had no idea how close I was to the moment that would finally break everything open. By the fifth day, exhaustion had settled into my bones in a way sleep couldn't touch. I woke up already tired, my mind racing through unfinished lists before my feet hit the floor. There was always something else, another call to make, another issue to smooth over, another quiet adjustment to prevent a conflict before it started. I told myself this was temporary, that once the house reached some version of stability, I could leave knowing I'd done my part. That was the lie I kept repeating. Marin, on the other hand, seemed to be unraveling by the hour. Every inconvenience became proof that the world was against her. If Ivy cried, it was because the house was too stressful. If a contractor ran late, it was no one respecting her time. If I suggested a schedule, nothing rigid, just predictable, it was somehow a personal attack. "You don't understand how hard this is for me," she said one afternoon, slumped dramatically at the kitchen table while I stood at the counter reviewing invoices. I didn't respond right away. I was calculating numbers in my head, trying to figure out how to stretch a budget that was already thin. Most of the upfront deposits had come from my account. My parents said they'd reimburse me once they moved some things around. They always said that. "I understand you're overwhelmed," I replied carefully. "That's why structure helps. Especially for Ivy." Marin's jaw tightened. "She's a child, Ilara. Not a project." The words stung more than I expected. That evening, my father pulled me aside in the hallway. His voice was calm, almost gentle, which made my stomach drop. "Your sister's having a hard time," he said. "Try not to push her." I wanted to ask when pushing had become the same thing as maintaining basic safety. I wanted to ask why her discomfort always mattered more than reality. Instead, I nodded. I always nodded. The next few days blurred together in a cycle of quiet labor and rising tension. I coordinated inspections, argued with a roofing company over faulty measurements, spent an entire afternoon on hold with the county permit office. Marin contributed little beyond commentary, usually critical, often emotional. Ivy was restless, bored, and increasingly destructive. She wasn't a bad child. She was an unsupervised one. She spilled paint on freshly sanded floors. She pulled at exposed insulation in the hallway. Once, she knocked over a toolbox and cut her finger on a loose screw. That was the first time I raised my voice. Not in anger. In fear. "Marin," I called. "She needs to be watched. This place isn't safe yet." The house went quiet. Marin stared at me like I'd slapped her. "How dare you talk about my daughter like that?" she whispered, already shaking. "That's not what I—" But she was already turning away, scooping Ivy into her arms, tears spilling down her face as she marched toward our parents' room. I stood there, heart pounding, knowing exactly what would happen next. 10 minutes later, my mother emerged, her expression tight and disappointed. "She's very upset," she said. "You need to be more sensitive." Sensitive. The word echoed in my head as I cleaned up the mess Ivy had left behind. By day 7, I was running on fumes. My hands were cracked from cleaning products. My back ached constantly. I'd turned down 2 work projects and was starting to feel the financial strain of being away this long. Still, I stayed. Some part of me believed that if I just held on a little longer, if I proved, once again, that I was dependable, something would finally shift. It didn't. The breaking moment came late that afternoon. I was in the kitchen reviewing a revised estimate when Maren walked in, her face already twisted with emotion. Ivy trailed behind her, rubbing her eyes, overtired and cranky. "What did you say to my daughter?" Maren demanded. I looked up, genuinely confused. "What?" "She said you called her bad. That you said she ruins everything." The accusation hit me like cold water. "I never said that," I replied immediately. "I said she's exhausted and needs rest. That's it." Maren's voice rose. "You always do this. You make everything sound reasonable, so I look crazy." Before I could respond, my parents were there. Drawn by the noise, by the tension they seemed conditioned to respond to on her behalf. Maren broke down completely, sobbing into my mother's shoulder. Ivy began crying too, overwhelmed by the chaos. I stood frozen, watching the scene form around me like a verdict I hadn't been allowed to defend against. My father's eyes met mine. There was no curiosity there. No question. Just judgment. "You need to apologize," he said. The room went still. "I didn't do what she's accusing me of," I said quietly. "That doesn't matter," he replied. "Your words hurt her. And they hurt Ivy." I felt something shift inside my chest. A tightening. A clarity I hadn't expected. "I won't apologize for something I didn't say," I said. That's when his voice changed. Not louder. Colder. "Then you shouldn't be here." The words landed heavily between us, final and unmistakable. "Say sorry," my father continued evenly, "or don't come back." I looked at him, really looked at him, and understood something in that moment that I'd spent my whole life avoiding. This wasn't about peace. This was about control. And for the first time, I didn't feel afraid. For a few seconds after my father spoke, no one moved. The house felt different then. Smaller. Like the walls had leaned in just enough to remind me that I was a guest in a place I had helped hold together. My mother's hand was still on Maren's back, rubbing slow circles. Ivy had gone quiet, her face pressed into her mother's shoulder. No one looked at me as if I were part of the scene anymore. I was something outside it. A disruption. I waited for the familiar instinct to rise, the urge to explain myself better, to soften my tone, to fix whatever had gone wrong. It had always come so easily before. But this time, it didn't. Instead, there was silence inside me. Clear and steady. "I understand," I said. My father blinked, just once. He wasn't expecting agreement. He was expecting resistance, maybe tears, maybe fear. Something that would confirm his authority still worked. "I'll leave in the morning," I added. Maren lifted her head sharply. My mother turned toward me, startled. "That's not what your father meant," she said quickly. "He's just asking you to smooth things over." I shook my head. "No." He was clear. My father said nothing. He didn't correct her. He didn't soften his words. He simply watched me, as if waiting for the moment I'd realize how badly I was about to lose. I didn't argue. I didn't pack dramatically. I finished what I was doing, closed my notebook, and went to the guest room I'd been sleeping in. My hands moved calmly as I folded my clothes. Each item felt like a small release. I left the tools I'd brought for the house stacked neatly by the door. Not out of kindness, out of closure. That night, no one came to talk to me. Dinner happened without me. I heard the muffled sounds of conversation, Maren's laugh, Ivy's voice. It was oddly peaceful. For the first time since I'd arrived, no one needed anything from me. I slept deeply. Before sunrise, I loaded my car quietly. The house was still dark. I paused once in the kitchen, looking at the half-finished repairs, the labeled folders on the counter, the calendar I'd drawn up in careful handwriting. Then I did something I'd never done before. I took my name out of the equation. I logged into the shared renovation account on my phone. Over the past week, I deposited just over $4,000. Money I'd assumed was temporary, that we were all contributing equally. I transferred back what was mine. I removed my payment information from every connected service. I canceled the contractor auto deposits I'd set up. I closed the spreadsheet and emailed myself a copy, then deleted it from the shared drive. I left the house key on the counter. By mid-morning, I was back on the highway, the familiar rhythm of the road steadying my thoughts. I expected my phone to ring. It didn't. No messages. No missed calls. Nothing. By the time I reached my apartment, the quiet felt heavy, but not painful. I slept again, this time without an alarm, without a list waiting for me when I woke. The knock came the next morning. Not a knock, really. A pounding. Sharp, urgent, insistent. I glanced at the clock. 9:12 a.m. When I opened the door, my mother stood there, eyes bright with anger, coat still on as if she hadn't planned to stay long. She didn't greet me. "What were you thinking?" she demanded, stepping forward. I stayed where I was, blocking the doorway without raising my voice. "About what?" "You know exactly what," she snapped. "You embarrassed us. You left without a word and took the money." I felt a flicker of something then, not guilt, not fear. Recognition. "I took my money," I said calmly. "The money I put in." "That wasn't supposed to be touched yet," she said sharply. "We needed that." I looked at her. Really looked. And the question that had lived quietly in my chest for years finally surfaced. "Did you ever care about me?" I asked. "Or just what I provide?" She froze. Not offended. Not outraged. Caught. The pause was brief, but it told me everything. She pushed past me into the apartment, her voice rising as she spoke. About stress. About how tired my father was. About how Marin was struggling. About how I'd overreacted. She circled the room as if the space itself belonged to her, listing grievances like debts I owed. I let her talk. When she finally stopped, I said, "I worked for 7 days. I paid for supplies. I managed repairs. And when I was falsely accused, I was told to apologize or leave. I chose to leave." She shook her head. "Families don't work like that." I met her eyes. "This one does." Her anger shifted into tears. She said I was tearing us apart, that I was cold, that I was selfish. I didn't argue. "You defended Marin," I said. "You always do. Now you can ask her for help." She left soon after, slamming the door behind her. I stood there for a long time, listening to the echo fade. I didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. I didn't post anything after my mother left. I didn't call anyone. I didn't feel the need to explain myself. Not yet. Part of me hoped the space would cool things down, that distance might finally do what years of careful behavior hadn't. That illusion lasted less than an hour. My phone buzzed with notifications before I'd even finished making coffee. Messages from numbers I recognized and some I didn't. Cousins. Old family friends. A former neighbor. The same tone echoed through all of them, even when the words were different. "What happened? Your parents are heartbroken. You shouldn't have walked away like that." I opened social media and found the source. Marin had posted a long message, carefully written, drenched in emotion. She talked about stress, abandonment, how our parents were left alone in the middle of a major renovation. She mentioned money without numbers, sacrifice without facts. She didn't name me directly at first, but the comments did. Then she tagged me. I read it once. Then again. My name sat there, attached to a story I barely recognized. According to Marin, I'd been harsh, controlling, and resentful of her child. I'd stormed out in anger, taken money meant for the house, and left our parents scrambling. The old version of me would have panicked. Would have called immediately, tried to soften the narrative, apologized just to make it stop. Instead, I closed the app. I spent the next hour pulling together what I'd never thought I'd need. Bank statements, receipts, contractor invoices, screenshots of the shared account showing my deposits, the renovation timeline I'd created, the emails I'd sent coordinating repairs. I didn't add commentary. I didn't justify. I didn't insult anyone. I posted one thing. A short introduction. A factual timeline. Proof. That was it. The response was immediate. Public accusations turned into quiet deletions. Comments disappeared. Messages shifted from confrontational to hesitant. Then apologetic. People started reaching out privately, asking questions they hadn't asked before, admitting they'd only heard one side. One message stopped me cold. It was from my Aunt Claire, my father's older sister. "We always knew you carried more than your share," she wrote. "I just didn't realize how much." By evening, Marin's post was gone. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise had been. That night, my father called. He didn't start with hello. "What you did was unacceptable," he said. His voice was clipped, controlled. "You humiliated this family." "I told the truth," I replied. "You made it public." "It already was," I said. "I just added facts." He lectured me about respect, about loyalty, about keeping things within the family. He spoke about stress, about how hard this move had been on everyone. He never mentioned the ultimatum. He never acknowledged the accusation against me. Then he got to the point. "We need you to fix this," he said. I waited. "You need to post a follow-up," he continued. "Say you misunderstood, that emotions were high, that you regret escalating things, and apologize?" I asked. There was a pause. "Yes," he said, "especially to your sister." I felt a strange calm settle over me. Did Marin apologize for lying? I asked. He ignored the question. "We're behind," he said instead. "The electrician needs another deposit. This has already gone too far." There it was, clear as day. I asked how much my parents had contributed to the renovation fund. Silence. Then, reluctantly, he admitted the truth. Most of it had been me. "It's family," he said, as if that explained everything. "We make sacrifices." I thought about every time I'd said yes. Every time I'd stepped in quietly so no one else had to. Every time I'd mistaken obligation for love. "I'm done sacrificing," I said. His tone hardened. "If you walk away now, don't expect us to come running when you need help." "I never expected that," I replied. "That's the difference." I hung up before he could respond. I thought the worst was over. It wasn't. 2 days later, my landlord called. He told me someone had been sitting in a car outside the building late at night. Same vehicle. Same spot. Not causing trouble. Just watching. A chill ran through me. The next day, I checked the security footage. It was my father's car. I didn't confront him. I documented everything. Dates. Times. Screenshots. Then I booked my first therapy appointment. I told myself it was just to process stress. I was wrong. Therapy didn't feel dramatic the way people make it seem. There were no breakthroughs in the first session, no sudden tears or revelations. Mostly, there was quiet, space, a woman across from me who listened without interrupting, without rushing to reframe or soften what I said. I told her everything, not just about the house or Marin or my father's ultimatum, but about the years before it. The patterns I'd learned so young I'd mistaken them for personality traits. The way being strong had become an excuse for everyone else to be careless with me. When I finished, she leaned back slightly and said something that landed heavier than anything my family had thrown at me. "This isn't about reconciliation," she said. "It's about access, and you've taken that away." The words stayed with me long after I left her office. Over the next week, the attempts shifted. My mother sent long emails, filled with concern that somehow still managed to feel like accusation. She worried about my mental health, about how I was isolating myself, about how walking away was extreme. Marin's messages were shorter and sharper, passive-aggressive in a way that tried to sound wounded. "I don't know why you hate me. I guess you never cared about Ivy." I didn't respond. Then came the payment request. It arrived on a random Tuesday morning, a notification from a payment app one rarely used. The amount made my stomach drop. $3,850. The note read, "Your share of the damage." I stared at it, trying to understand what damage she meant. The repairs I'd managed? The messes I'd cleaned? The work I'd paid for? There was no explanation. Just an invoice for a story she'd already decided to believe. I declined the request without comment. That's when things started to unravel. 2 days later, my bank flagged a login attempt on an old account I'd helped my parents access years earlier. I'd assumed I'd removed all permissions when I left. I hadn't. Someone had tried to get in from their town. I froze for exactly 1 second. Then I moved. New passwords. Two-factor authentication. Account freezes. A brand new bank altogether. I spent hours on the phone locking down everything I could think of: financial, digital, informational. By the time I was done, my hands were shaking. This wasn't concern. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was desperation. I called my therapist again. She listened quietly, then said, "You're doing the right thing. But you need to stop explaining. Every explanation is an invitation." That night, I couldn't sleep. The realization kept looping in my mind, fitting pieces together I'd never wanted to see aligned. They hadn't needed me. They'd needed entry points. To my money, my organization, my sense of responsibility. And now that those doors were closed, they were trying to find another way in. The next day, I did something I'd never done before. I called my Uncle Rowan, my mother's younger brother. He lived across the country and had always kept his distance from family drama. We'd spoken politely over the years, but never like this. When I told him everything, he didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was a long pause. "Your parents were nearly bankrupt when Marin got pregnant," he said quietly. "They didn't tell you because they didn't need to." I closed my eyes. "They borrowed from everyone," he continued. "Friends, relatives. Most people eventually said no. And I didn't," I said. "No," he agreed. "You didn't." The call ended shortly after that. I sat there, the weight of it settling into my chest, not crushing, just clarifying. It wasn't that I was difficult. It wasn't that I was cold. I was the one they could rely on to never walk away. Until now. The final confrontation came at my cousin's engagement party, 3 weeks later. I almost didn't go. I expected tension. I expected whispers. What I didn't expect was how many people quietly came up to me first. A squeeze of the arm. A murmured apology. One cousin leaned in and whispered, "We were wondering when someone would finally stand up to them." Across the room, I saw my parents. My mother smiled too brightly. My father avoided my eyes. Marin laughed loudly at nothing. Later, I heard her telling someone it was all a misunderstanding, that I'd overreacted, that I owed her money. I stood. I didn't raise my voice. "You lied about me," I said calmly, looking directly at her. "Dad told me to apologize for something I didn't do or leave. Mom came to my apartment demanding money. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a pattern." The table went silent. Marin stood up abruptly and left. My parents followed soon after. I stayed. For the first time, I wasn't the one who had to go. After the engagement party, something shifted, quietly but unmistakably. The messages stopped. No more late-night calls, no guilt-soaked emails, no Venmo requests disguised as misunderstandings. It was as if my parents and Marin had finally realized that whatever leverage they thought they had was gone. I didn't feel relief. I felt clarity. I started filling the space they had left behind with things I'd never allowed myself to prioritize. Morning runs that left my lungs burning in the best way. Therapy sessions on Thursdays that slowly untangled the years of invisible obligation. Work that I loved again. Projects that felt like they mattered beyond deadlines and spreadsheets. I stopped apologizing for being unavailable. I stopped making myself convenient. My calendar, my time, my life, it finally belonged to me. I even booked a solo trip to Colorado, something I'd always talked myself out of because it felt selfish. Standing in the early dawn on a cliffside trail, watching the sunlight stretch over the mountains, I felt a sensation I hadn't known in years. Peace. Not relief, not numbness. Just peace. And beneath it, a growing understanding. I hadn't lost family. I had learned who had never deserved unfettered access to my life. Aunt Claire called me that evening. She had always been cautious about family conflicts, but this time she spoke plainly. "They've been using you since you were a teenager," she said. "Control, access, it's all they ever wanted. Not your company. Not your love." Her words confirmed everything I had felt but couldn't say. It wasn't about the house. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't even really about Marin. It was about power. And finally, for the first time, I wasn't part of the equation. I still don't hear from my parents. I still don't hear from Marin. There are moments when part of me misses them, or thinks about how it used to be, before responsibility became leverage. But those moments are fleeting, like shadows passing across the sunlight. I know now that their absence isn't punishment. It's peace. The world feels different when you stop being a solution for someone else's convenience. Suddenly, you notice how many things you can do that aren't dictated by obligation. A quiet evening with a book, a call to a friend you actually want to speak to, a laugh that isn't measured against anyone else's comfort. I never realized how much I'd been measuring myself against their approval, how many years of energy I'd given away. I remember the day I locked the front door of my apartment after my mother had left, months ago. I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and empowerment. At the time, it felt like a defensive act. Now, I understand it was the first step toward freedom. It wasn't dramatic. There were no tears, no angry confrontation, just a calm decision to reclaim boundaries that had never been respected. Over the following months, I rebuilt my life on my terms. I stayed connected with relatives who respected boundaries. I pursued opportunities that had once seemed too selfish to consider. I allowed myself quiet joys, small celebrations, and deep rest. And somewhere along the way, the weight of my family's expectations no longer defined me. One afternoon, I received an unexpected email from a contractor in northern Michigan, a follow-up about the house project. He wrote that without my management, the renovation had collapsed. Permits had expired. Contractors walked away. Timing alone had forced delays. Marin had lost her part-time job shortly after. There was no gloating in my response. I simply noted, "I hope things improve for you." No additional energy was required. None of the old guilt, none of the old responsibility. Just a clear boundary and a life that finally felt mine. I never sought revenge. I didn't need to. Control had always been their weapon, and by stepping away, I removed their ammunition. What remained was quiet clarity, a sense of self I had never allowed myself before. My father's voice no longer had the power to make me tremble. My mother's pleas no longer made me second-guess. Marin's drama no longer demanded intervention. I was no longer the daughter who fixed everything. I was simply me. That is the ultimate lesson. Sometimes, love and loyalty are not about enduring chaos or defending illusions. Sometimes, the strongest action is stepping back. The hardest but most freeing response is silence, boundaries, and self-respect. I walk forward now without fear, without apology, without guilt. And in that calm certainty, I finally understand that the life I've been chasing was never about earning approval. It was about reclaiming myself. And nothing could be more satisfying than that.